David rubbed his tired eyes as he walked into Stellar Ground's coffee shop. It was Tuesday morning, and like every other morning for the past 3 years, he needed his usual large coffee to wake up properly. The familiar smell of roasted beans filled his nose as he stepped inside the warm, cozy shop. The morning rush was almost over. Only a few people sat at the small round tables, typing on their laptops or reading newspapers. David liked coming here because it wasn't too crowded or too quiet, just right for someone who worked with computers all day and needed a peaceful start to his morning. He ordered his regular drink, a medium latte with an extra shot of coffee. The young man behind the counter knew his order by heart and had it ready in just 3 minutes. David paid with his card, left a small tip, and found his usual spot by the window. The coffee was perfect, as always. Hot, smooth, and strong enough to help him think clearly. David pulled out his phone and checked his work emails while he drank. Nothing urgent, just the usual stuff about meetings and project deadlines. He worked as a software engineer at a tech company downtown, creating apps and fixing computer problems. It was good work, but sometimes it felt like he spent more time talking to machines than to real people. After finishing half his coffee, David noticed something interesting happening at the counter. A woman had just ordered, but she seemed confused about something simple. She was staring at the payment machine like she had never seen one before. The coffee shop worker had to show her how to tap her card 3 times before it worked. The woman was tall and had bright blonde hair that looked almost white under the coffee shop lights. Her skin was very pale, so pale it seemed to glow slightly. She wore a simple black dress that looked expensive, and she moved in a way that seemed almost as smooth, like a dancer or someone who had practiced every step. David couldn't help but watch her. There was something unusual about the way she acted. When she got her coffee, she held the cup with both hands and stared at it for a long moment, like she was studying it instead of planning to drink it. She found a table near the back and sat down very straight, not relaxed like most people do in coffee shops. David finished his latte and gathered his things. He had to get to work soon, and the morning traffic was getting worse every day. As he walked toward the front door, he noticed the strange woman was also getting ready to leave. She was walking behind him, carrying her coffee cup in that same careful way. When David reached the glass door, he did what his parents had taught him to do since he was a little boy. He opened the door and stepped aside, holding it open for the woman behind him. It was automatic, something he did without thinking. His mother had always said that being polite costs nothing but means everything after you. David said with a friendly smile, expecting the woman to simply walk through and maybe say thank you. But that's not what happened at all. The woman stopped walking so suddenly that she almost spilled her coffee. She stood there in the middle of the doorway, staring at the open door like it was some kind of puzzle she couldn't solve. Her bright green eyes went wide, and her mouth opened slightly in what looked like complete shock. David had never seen anyone react to a simple polite gesture like this before. The woman looked at the door, then at David, then back at the door again. She seemed genuinely confused, like someone had just asked her to solve a difficult math problem in her head. I don't understand, she said in a voice that was beautiful but somehow strange. She spoke clearly, but there was something about her accent that David couldn't identify. It wasn't from any country he knew, but it wasn't quite American either. Why are you stopping yourself from going through? Are you less important than me? David blinked in surprise. Less important? What kind of question was that? He had never heard anyone ask something like that about holding a door open. It was just basic manners, something people did for each other every day. No, David said, still holding the door and trying to keep his voice normal. It's not about importance. It's just, being polite. Ladies first, right? The woman's confusion seemed to get even deeper. She tilted her head to one side, but she tilted it too far, at an angle that looked uncomfortable for a normal person. She was studying David's face like a scientist looking at something under a microscope, trying to figure out what it was and how it worked out. By now, Other people in the coffee shop had started to notice what was happening. A few customers near the door were watching the strange scene, probably wondering why this woman couldn't understand something as simple as someone being polite. David was starting to feel awkward. He had been holding the door for almost a full minute now, and the woman still hadn't moved. She just kept staring at him with those bright green eyes, like she was trying to read his mind or solve some kind of mystery. Finally, after what felt like forever, the woman took a careful step forward. She moved through the doorway very slowly, never taking her eyes off David's face. As she passed by him, David caught a strange smell. It wasn't perfume or soap or anything normal. It smelled like the air right after lightning strikes during a thunderstorm, sharp and electric and completely out of place. The woman made it through the door and stopped on the sidewalk outside. Instead of walking away like a normal person would, she turned around to look at David through the glass. Her stare was so intense it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. She wasn't looking at him the way people usually look at each other. It was more like the way someone might look at a strange animal at the zoo, curious, but also careful and a little afraid. David saw her lips move, and even though he couldn't hear her through the glass, it looked like she said the word fascinating. She said it the way a scientist might say it after discovering something completely new. An unexpected dot then, just like that, she turned and walked away. She disappeared into the crowd of people walking to work, leaving David standing there with his hand still on the door handle, wondering what in the world had just happened. David finally let the door close and stood there for a moment, trying to process what he had just experienced. In 28 years of life, he had held doors open for hundreds of people. Some said thank you. Some didn't, but none of them had ever reacted like that woman did. None of them had ever looked at him like he was some kind of puzzle to be solved. As he walked to his car, David couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, even though he couldn't understand what it was. That simple act of politeness, something he had done thousands of times before without thinking about it, had somehow changed everything. The woman's face stayed in his mind as he drove to work. Those two bright green eyes, that strange tilted head, and most of all, that look of complete confusion over something every human being understood. It was like she had never seen someone hold a door open before, like she was learning about human behavior for the very first time. David tried to focus on his work that day, but he kept thinking about the encounter. Something told him this wasn't the last time he would see that strange, pale woman with the electric smell and the scientist's stare. Something told him that his simple act of kindness had started something much bigger than he could imagine. David couldn't get the strange woman out of his head all week long, during his morning drive to work, during boring meetings, and even while watching TV at night. He kept thinking about her reaction to him holding the door. He had replayed the scene in his mind so many times that he could remember every detail. Her confused face, that weird electric smell, and the way she stared at him like he was some kind of puzzle. By Thursday, David found himself changing his morning routine. Instead of rushing through his coffee and heading straight to work, he started lingering at Stellar Grounds a little longer. He told himself he was just enjoying his latte, but deep down he knew the truth. He was hoping to see her again. Part of him wanted answers, and another part of him was curious about what would happen if they met a second time. His patience paid off on Friday morning. David was sitting at his usual table by the window when she walked in. The same bright blonde hair that looked almost white, the same pale skin that seemed to glow under the coffee shop lights, and the same expensive black dress. She moved with that same unnaturally smooth walk, like she was floating instead of stepping. This time, David watched her more carefully. He pretended to read emails on his phone while secretly observing everything she did. The woman walked up to the counter and ordered, but David noticed something odd about her voice. When she spoke to the worker behind the counter, her words sounded like she was reading from a script instead of having a normal conversation. "I would like one coffee beverage, please," she said in that strange accent. "Black liquid. No additional substances." The coffee shop worker looked confused. "You mean just black coffee?" "Yes, Black coffee, she repeated, like she was learning a new phrase. When she got her drink, David noticed something that made his stomach feel weird. The coffee in her white cup didn't look like normal coffee at all. It was dark, yes, but it seemed to shimmer and move in a way that reminded him of oil floating on water. The surface had colors that shifted between black, purple, and dark blue, like the coffee was alive somehow. The woman found a table across the room from David and sat down with perfect posture. She never slouched or relaxed like regular people do. She placed her strange coffee on the table and pulled out what looked like a normal smartphone. But David noticed she held it wrong. Sometimes she spoke into the back of the phone instead of the screen. Other times she held it upside down while trying to use it. David watched as other customers walked past her table. When a man accidentally bumped into her chair, she didn't say excuse me or show any annoyance like most people would. Instead, she turned to study the man with intense focus, watching him walk away like she was memorizing how he moved and acted. The most unsettling thing was how she never seemed to blink normally. David started counting the seconds between her blinks, and they were all wrong. Sometimes she would stare without blinking for 2 or 3 minutes straight. Other times she would blink rapidly 5 or 6 times in a row, like she suddenly remembered. She was supposed to do it. After about 20 minutes, David decided he needed to test something. He finished his coffee and got ready to leave, timing it so he would reach the door at the same time as the woman. Sure enough, she stood up and walked toward the exit just as he did. When they reached the front door, David took a deep breath and did the same thing he had done before. He opened the door and stepped aside, holding it for her with a polite smile. This time, her reaction was different but equally strange. Instead of freezing in confusion, she stopped and pulled out her phone. She held it up and seemed to be recording him standing there with the door open. David could hear her speaking into the device, but her words made his blood run cold. Subject continues to display the same unusual behavior. She said in a flat, emotionless voice. Human male blocks his own path to allow female passage. No obvious benefit to male. Purpose remains unclear. Recording for further analysis. David felt like someone had dropped ice cubes down his back. Subject, analysis. What was she talking about, and why was she recording him like he was some kind of experiment? The woman noticed that David was listening to her strange commentary. She lowered the phone and looked directly at him for a moment. Her face showed what might have been panic, like she had accidentally revealed something she wasn't supposed to. Then her expression changed into what was probably meant to be a normal, friendly smile. But the smile was all wrong. Her teeth were too white, too perfectly straight, like a toothpaste commercial. The smile didn't reach her eyes, and it looked like she had practiced it in a mirror, but hadn't quite figured out how to make it look natural. "Thank you for the courtesy lesson," she said. And the way she said the word courtesy made it sound like she was tasting something new and trying to decide if she liked it. David didn't know what to say. His mouth felt dry, and his heart was beating faster than normal. You're welcome," he managed to say. The woman walked through the held door, but as she passed by him, David noticed something that made him question his own eyesight. The coffee shop's front door had a shiny chrome handle that acted like a mirror. David could see his own reflection clearly in the polished metal, but when the woman walked past, there was no reflection of her at all. It was like she was invisible to mirrors. David blinked hard and looked again, but she was already walking away down the sidewalk. He stared at the chrome handle, seeing only his own confused face looking back at him. As he watched her disappear into the crowd of morning commuters, David noticed one more disturbing detail. Everyone else on the busy sidewalk walked around each other naturally, adjusting their pace and direction without thinking about it. But other people seemed to avoid the woman. Without realizing they were doing it, they would suddenly step to one side or cross the street, like some invisible force was pushing them away from her. David finally let go of the door and walked to his car, but his hands were shaking as he put the key in the ignition. His mind was racing with questions that seemed impossible to answer. Why was she recording him? Why did she talk about him like he was a test subject in some kind of study? And what did she mean by courtesy lesson? The drive to work felt longer than usual because David couldn't concentrate on the road. He kept thinking about her words, and the way she had acted, like holding a door open, was some kind of strange foreign behavior that needed to be studied and analyzed. By the time he got to his office, David had made a decision. Something very weird was happening, and he needed to figure out what it was. That woman wasn't just unusual. She was acting like someone who had never been around humans before, like she was learning how people behaved by watching and recording them. David spent his lunch break that day doing something he had never done before. He started researching strange encounters and unusual people online. Most of what he found seemed crazy, but some of the stories he read made him feel less alone. Other people had met individuals who seemed to be studying human behavior, who didn't understand basic social interactions, who acted like they were visitors trying to learn how to blend in. The more David read, the more convinced he became that his simple act of politeness had somehow marked him as interesting to someone, or something that definitely wasn't what it appeared to be. And if that was true, then his problems were just beginning. David's weekend was ruined. Instead of relaxing or hanging out with friends, he spent both Saturday and Sunday glued to his computer, searching for answers about his strange encounter. He started with simple searches like weird people acting strange and unusual behavior in public, but those just gave him articles about mental health and social anxiety. Then he tried more specific terms: people who don't understand politeness, strange reactions to kindness, individuals studying human behavior. The deeper he dug into the internet, the stranger the results became. He found forums where people shared stories about encounters with individuals who seemed to be learning how to act human, who responded to normal social situations with confusion or clinical interest. One story in particular made David's skin crawl. A woman in Oregon wrote about meeting someone at a grocery store who didn't understand why people said "bless you" when someone sneezed. The person had pulled out a notebook and written down the interaction, asking detailed questions about the purpose of the blessing and whether it had any medical benefits. Just like the woman with the phone recording his door holding behavior. Another account came from a man in Florida who described meeting someone who was fascinated by the concept of waiting in line. The person had stood in a coffee shop queue for over an hour, not to buy anything, but to observe how people naturally formed orderly groups and took turns. When asked what they were doing, they had responded with clinical language about social organization patterns and voluntary compliance behaviors. David felt his heart racing as he read story after story. That sounded disturbingly similar to his own experience. People who seemed human but acted like they were studying humanity from the outside. Individuals who recorded or documented normal social interactions, like they were discovering them for the first time. By Sunday evening, David had made a decision that scared him. He was going to try to get more information directly from the source. On Monday morning, he would go back to Stellar Grounds, but this time he would be prepared. He spent Sunday night setting up a small recording app on his phone and practicing how to secretly take photos without being obvious about it. Monday morning came too quickly. David's hands were shaking as he ordered his usual latte, and he nearly spilled it twice while walking to his table. He chose a spot in the corner where he could see the entire coffee shop and have his back protected by two walls. His phone was ready, positioned on the table like he was casually checking messages. The woman arrived at exactly the same time as the previous week. David was starting to wonder if she had some kind of internal clock that was more precise than normal human timing. She moved through the coffee shop with that same unnaturally smooth walk, ordered her strange, shimmering coffee, and found a table where she could observe other customers. This time, David managed to secretly take several photos of her while pretending to scroll through his phone. He also started the recording app, hoping to capture some of her strange behavior on audio. What he witnessed over the next hour was even more disturbing than before. The woman had brought a notebook, not a computer or tablet, but an actual paper notebook with a pen. She was drawing detailed diagrams of the coffee shop's layout, marking where each customer sat and drawing arrows to show how people moved through the space. David watched in growing horror as she created what looked like a scientific study of human behavior. She drew charts showing how long people spent in line, how they chose their seats, and how they interacted with each other. When someone held the door for another customer, she made rapid notes and sketched the interaction from multiple angles. The most unsettling moment came when a young mother entered the coffee shop with her crying baby. The woman's reaction was immediate and intense. She froze completely, tilting her head to listen to the infant's cries with an expression of complete fascination. She began writing frantically in her notebook, glancing back and forth between the baby and her notes, like she was documenting a newly discovered species. David realized with growing terror that she was treating human beings exactly like a scientist would study animals in their natural habitat. As the morning progressed, David noticed other strange details. The woman never seemed to get tired or uncomfortable from sitting in the same position for so long. She didn't fidget, stretch, or shift in her chair like normal people do. Her coffee cup remained full despite her occasionally lifting it to her lips. It was like she was pretending to drink rather than actually consuming the liquid. When other customers walked past her table, she would track their movements with her eyes in a way that was too obvious to focus. Normal people might glance at someone walking by, but she studied them like a security camera following a target. David's blood turned to ice when he realized something even more terrifying. The woman wasn't just observing random people. She was specifically watching for acts of kindness and politeness. Every time someone held a door, said please or thank you, helped someone with their bags, or showed any form of courtesy, she would make urgent notes in her book. It was like she was building a database of human kindness, documenting every polite gesture and helpful act she witnessed. And David knew with sickening certainty that his door-holding behavior had somehow flagged him as a prime example of whatever she was studying. As closing time approached, David made his move. He timed his departure to coincide with hers and once again positioned himself at the front door. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it, but he needed to test his growing suspicions one more time. When David held the door open for her, she didn't freeze or look confused like the first time. She didn't record him like the second time. Instead, she stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see her pupils didn't react properly to changes in light, and spoke words that confirmed his worst fears. David Rodriguez, she said, and hearing his full name in her strange voice made his stomach drop. Software engineer, lives at 847 Oak Street, apartment to C. Works for TouchFlow Solutions on the 12th floor of the Madison building. David had never told her any personal information. He had never mentioned his name, his job, or where he lived. Yet she knew details about his life that made it clear she had been researching him, following him, or worse, your continued door-holding behavior has been recorded and analyzed. She continued in that same clinical tone that made her sound like a doctor delivering test results. We find your species' tendency toward unprovoked assistance both puzzling and intriguing. The word species hit David like a physical blow. She wasn't talking about different types of people or personality traits. She was talking about him, like he belonged to a different kind of creature entirely. Like she was something else studying the strange habits of human beings. My colleagues and I have determined that your behavior represents either a beneficial mutation or a significant evolutionary anomaly, she continued, still standing uncomfortably close. Further study is required to understand the prevalence and purpose of such actions among your kind. David's throat felt like sandpaper. He wanted to run, to scream, to do anything except stand there listening to this thing discuss him like a lab specimen. But his feet seemed glued to the floor, and his voice had completely disappeared. You will continue your normal routines, she said, and now there was no mistaking the command in her voice. Any deviation from your established patterns will be noted and investigated. We are particularly interested in observing whether your kindness behaviors persist under stress or surveillance. With that terrifying statement, she stepped through the held door and walked away. leaving David standing there with the horrible realization that his simple act of politeness had made him the subject of some kind of inhuman study. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she and her colleagues were watching him, documenting his every move, and treating his basic human decency like a fascinating scientific mystery that needed to be solved. David didn't sleep at all that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the woman's words over and over in his mind. Your species, my colleagues. Further study is required. Every phrase made his skin crawl and his heart race faster. He kept getting up to check that his front door was locked, even though he knew it wouldn't matter if these beings could somehow learn his personal information. Without him ever telling them. By morning, David had convinced himself that going to the police would be a mistake. Who would believe his story? A strange woman at a coffee shop was studying human politeness? They would think he was losing his mind or making it all up. Even if they did believe him, what could they do? She hadn't technically threatened him or broken any laws. She had just been observing. But David knew this was bigger than just one weird person. The woman had mentioned colleagues, which meant there were others like her, others who were studying humans, documenting their behavior, and treating people like science experiments. The thought made David feel sick to his stomach, despite every instinct telling him to stay home and hide. David knew he had to go back to stellar grounds. Running away wouldn't give him answers, and the woman had already made it clear that they were watching him. If he suddenly changed his routine, they would notice and investigate. The idea of these beings digging deeper into his life was even more terrifying than facing whatever was coming next. David spent Tuesday morning preparing like he was going into battle. He fully charged his phone and set up multiple recording apps. He wrote a detailed email to his sister explaining everything that had happened, scheduled to send automatically if he didn't cancel it by evening. He even left a note in his apartment describing the situation, just in case something happened to him. When David walked into the coffee shop, his hands were shaking so badly, he could barely hold his coffee cup. The woman was already there, sitting at a table in the most isolated corner of the shop. When she saw him enter, she didn't wave or smile. Instead, she simply pointed to the empty chair across from her, like she was directing him to take a seat. David's legs felt like jelly as he walked over to her table. Up close, her inhuman nature was even more obvious than before. Her skin had that strange glow he had noticed before, but now he could see it wasn't makeup or lighting effects. The luminescence was coming from within her skin, like she had some kind of internal light source. Her breathing was steady, rhythmic, like someone who had to consciously remember to inhale and exhale. Sit down, David Rodriguez, she said, and it wasn't a request. It was a command delivered in a voice that expected immediate obedience. David sat down, his heart hammering against his ribs. The woman studied his face with those unnaturally bright eyes, tilting her head at angles that would be uncomfortable for a real human being. My designation within our research group is, you may call me Lisa, she said after a long pause, like she was searching through a list of acceptable human names. It is a name from your culture that my kind finds suitable for this type of interaction. You're kind, David whispered, barely able to get the words out. Lisa nodded, apparently pleased that he understood the situation. We have been conducting observational studies of your species for an extended period. Small research teams have been placed within your major population centers to document and analyze human social behaviors. Most members of your species follow predictable patterns, actions driven by personal gain, territorial disputes, reproductive strategies, basic survival instincts. David felt like he was having a nightmare while wide awake. She was talking about human beings like they were animals in a zoo, describing complex human emotions and relationships like simple biological programming. But you, Lisa continued, leaning forward to study him more closely, you demonstrate behaviors that serve no apparent evolutionary purpose. You expend energy to assist strangers with no expectation of reward or reciprocal benefit. You show courtesy to individuals who cannot improve your social status or reproductive success. This suggests either a genetic defect in your survival programming or…" She paused, seeming to struggle with the concept. "Something our research models have not yet accounted for." David's mouth felt completely dry. "What do you want from me, Data?" Lisa replied immediately, like she had been waiting for that exact question. "Your repeated door-holding behavior has been classified as a significant anomaly in our behavioral database. We require additional information to determine whether this represents a widespread mutation in human nature or an isolated genetic variation." She reached into a small bag beside her chair and pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and some kind of medical scanner. The surface was smooth and black, but it seemed to shift and ripple like liquid when she moved. "We would like you to participate in an expanded research protocol," Lisa said, sliding the device across the table toward David. "You will document your daily social interactions, with particular focus on instances of unprovoked assistance to other humans. The device will record not only your actions, but also your physiological responses, heart rate, stress hormones, brain activity patterns." David stared at the alien device, afraid to touch it but unable to look away. "What happens if I say no?" Lisa's attempt at a reassuring smile was perhaps the most terrifying thing David had ever seen. Her teeth were to white, to perfectly ranged, and the expression didn't reach her eyes at all. It was like watching someone who had studied pictures of smiling, but had never actually felt happiness. "Refusal would indicate that you understand the true nature of our research," Lisa said in a tone that was somehow both gentle and threatening. "Such understanding would require us to implement alternative data collection methods. These methods would be less comfortable for you and less precise for us, but they would still provide the information we need." The implied threat hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. David realized that he wasn't being given a choice. He was being told what was going to happen, with the illusion that he had some control over the situation. However, Lisa continued, "Your cooperation would allow you to maintain your current lifestyle while contributing to research that may ultimately benefit your species. Consider this: your voluntary participation may help us determine whether humans possess qualities that are worth preserving." Those last two words hit David like a punch to the stomach. Worth preserving. She was talking about the survival of the entire human race, and somehow his simple habit of holding doors open for people had made him a key factor in that evaluation. "What do you mean?" "Worth preserving?" David asked, though he was terrified to hear the answer. Lisa tilted her head again, studying him like a puzzle she was trying to solve. "Our research is part of a larger assessment protocol. Your species has reached a level of technological development that makes you noticeable to other civilizations. We are here to evaluate whether humans represent a potential ally, a manageable resource, or a threat that requires elimination." David's vision started to blur around the edges. The casual way she discussed the potential elimination of humanity made his blood turn to ice water. These beings weren't just studying human behavior out of curiosity. They were deciding whether the entire human race deserved to continue existing. Your data could influence that decision. Lisa continued, "If kindness and cooperation are fundamental traits of your species rather than rare anomalies, it could significantly impact our final assessment. If, however, your behavior represents an isolated mutation with no broader significance." She didn't need to finish the sentence. David understood perfectly. His cooperation wouldn't just be about his own survival. It would be about representing the best of humanity to beings who held the power to destroy everything he had ever known or loved. David reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the alien device. It felt warm to the touch, and he could swear he felt it pulse gently against his palm, like it was alive and responding to his touch. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa's smile became slightly more genuine, though it was still far from human. "Simply continue being yourself, David Rodriguez. Continue showing kindness to strangers. Continue holding doors open for people who cannot benefit you. And allow our device to document everything so we can understand whether your actions represent the true nature of humanity, or merely an evolutionary accident? As David looked down at the device in his hands, he realized that his simple act of politeness had somehow made him responsible for the future of his entire species. The weight of 8 billion human lives suddenly rested on his shoulders, all because he had been taught to hold doors open for strangers. 3 weeks passed, and David's life had become something he never could have imagined. The alien device sat on his nightstand every night, charging with a soft blue glow that reminded him constantly of his impossible situation. During the day, it recorded everything: his conversations, his actions, even his heartbeat and stress levels when he helped strangers. David had started paying attention to small acts of kindness in a way he never had before. He watched people help elderly customers reach items on high shelves in grocery stores. He saw strangers give directions to lost tourists, share umbrellas during sudden rainstorms, and hold elevator doors for people running to catch them. Each time he witnessed these moments, the device would pulse gently in his pocket, recording data that might determine whether humanity deserved to survive. The weight of responsibility was crushing. David had trouble sleeping, knowing that every interaction he had could potentially influence the fate of 8 billion people. He found himself second-guessing every polite gesture, wondering if he was acting naturally or if the pressure was making him behave differently. Lisa met with him twice each week at Stellar Grounds, always at the same corner table. She would review the data from his device with the detached interest of a scientist studying lab results. But David had started noticing small changes in her behavior during these meetings. She was beginning to mimic human gestures more naturally, and occasionally something that looked almost like genuine curiosity would flicker in her two bright eyes. "Your data continues to exceed our initial projections," Lisa told him during their latest meeting, her voice carrying less of that clinical coldness than before. "The frequency of cooperative behaviors among your species is significantly higher than our preliminary observations suggested. Our computer models predicted such actions would be rare statistical outliers, but they appear to be integrated throughout your social structure." David leaned forward, sensing an opportunity. Maybe that's because kindness isn't just random behavior. Maybe it's one of the things that makes us human. Lisa tilted her head in that strange way she always did when processing new information. "Kindness," she repeated slowly, like she was tasting an unfamiliar food. "Our language does not contain a direct equivalent for this concept. The closest translation would be an efficient resource distribution toward genetically unrelated individuals. But that's not what kindness is at all," David said, his voice growing stronger despite his fear. "It's not about resources or genetics. It's about understanding that we're all connected, that helping others makes everyone's life better. It's about choosing to be better than just surviving." For the first time since David had known her, Lisa looked genuinely confused rather than clinically detached. Her perfect composure cracked slightly, revealing something underneath that might have been uncertainty. "Explain the evolutionary advantage," she said, leaning forward with intense focus. "What survival benefit does your species gain from expending energy on individuals who cannot improve your reproductive success or social status?" David thought about all the small kindnesses he had documented over the past 3 weeks. He remembered the way people's faces lit up when someone helped them, how acts of generosity seemed to spread from person to person like ripples in a pond, creating chains of positive behavior that lasted long after the original gesture was forgotten. "Maybe survival isn't the only point," David said carefully. "Maybe the real goal is creating a world worth living in. Maybe being kind to strangers makes life meaningful in ways that just staying alive can't." Lisa stared at him for a long moment, and David could practically see her trying to process this concept through whatever analytical framework her species used to understand the universe. Something was shifting behind her luminous eyes, like pieces of a puzzle suddenly clicking into place. "I must consult with my research team," she said finally, her voice carrying a note David had never heard before, something that sounded almost like uncertainty. "Your species continues to present behavioral anomalies that require significant revision of our assessment protocols." She stood up to leave. gathering her notebook and the small recording devices she always brought to their meetings. But then she paused, looking back at David with an expression he couldn't quite read. "David Rodriguez," she said, her voice softer than usual. "If kindness provides no measurable survival advantage, why do you continue to practice it even when you know it marked you for observation by a potentially hostile species?" David considered the question seriously. It was something he had asked himself many times over the past 3 weeks, especially during the sleepless nights when the weight of representing humanity felt too heavy to bear. "Because the alternative is to stop being human," he said quietly. "And if that's what it takes to survive, then maybe we're not worth saving anyway." Lisa stared at him for another long moment, her expression cycling through emotions that David was learning to recognize: confusion, analysis, and something new that might have been understanding. "Your assessment period is now complete," she announced, her voice returning to its formal tone. "The final evaluation will be determined by our collective leadership, based on the data you have provided and my direct observations. You will know the outcome within 48 hours. As she turned to walk toward the exit, David made a decision that surprised even him. He stood up, walked to the door, and once again held it open for her, just as he had done that very first day when this all began. Lisa froze in the doorway, but this time her expression wasn't confusion or clinical interest. It was something deeper, more complex. She looked at the open door, then at David's face, then back at the door again. But now there was recognition in her eyes, like she was finally beginning to understand something that had been invisible to her before. "I am beginning to comprehend," she said slowly, "why this specific behavior was flagged as anomalous by our monitoring systems. It is not the physical action that is significant. It is the choice to persist in goodness despite knowledge of potential consequences." She stepped through the doorway, then turned back to face him. When she spoke again, her voice had lost almost all of its artificial quality. "I will include this final observation in my report," she said. "The outcome may be different than either of us expected, David Rodriguez. It has certainly been different than I was prepared for." As Lisa disappeared into the evening crowd, David realized that something fundamental had changed during their weeks of interaction. The being who had started as a cold, clinical observer had somehow been affected by her study of human kindness. She had come to Earth to evaluate whether humans deserved to survive, but in the process, she had begun to learn what it meant to be human herself. David let the door swing closed and walked back to his table, where the alien device sat quietly, recording the final moments of his assessment period. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something that might have been hope. His simple act of holding a door open for a stranger had started as an automatic gesture of politeness, but it had become something much larger, a demonstration that kindness could transcend species, that the best parts of humanity might be worth preserving not just for survival, but for the possibility of something better. 6 months later, David still held doors open for strangers. But now, sometimes, he noticed other people doing the same, people with slightly too perfect features and slightly too bright eyes, people who seemed to be learning what it meant to be human, one small act of kindness at a time. The invasion never came. Instead, something far more profound had happened. The observers had become participants in the very humanity they had come to judge.